A soon-to-be-released book by veteran Washington journalist Bob Woodward is offering a remarkable and shocking look at what President Joe Biden really thinks about some of America's closest allies.
In his new book, Bob Woodward describes Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin as one that continued after Trump left the White House. The two men, Woodward says, exchanging phone calls as recently as earlier this year.
Whoever gets to be President of the United States is going to inherit a world living on the edge of imploding.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Jonathan Capehart, Associate Editor at The Washington Post. Well, he's done it again. Bob Woodward, the Washington Post Associate Editor and chronicler of presidents and their administrations going back to Richard Nixon, is out today with an insider account of President Biden's handling of Ukraine and Israel. The name of the book is War. And joining me now is Bob Woodward. Bob, welcome back to Washington Post Live.
Thank you. Good to see you.
You too. Congratulations on yet another book. So, Bob, as you well know, War chronicles three simultaneous events. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war on Ukraine, escalating violence in the Middle East, and serious political unrest here in the United States. Why these three, and which of these three do you see as the most serious long-term threat?
Well, I think they're all threats, but why these three? They're interconnected. It's the world we live in, and it represents the hazards that we face as a country. Really, it's solid. Jonathan, if you will bear with me, I briefly want to read something from the book that Senator
Sure.
Lindsey Graham of South Carolina said. He's a Trump supporter, but also somebody who can be hard on Trump. But he makes this overall conclusion. Trump represents a real part of the American family. It's not a wound. It's part of who we are. And a lot of people don't like that. I think Trump is a grotesque problem for our country, but he is part of the country. As we know from the polling and all of the discussion and the coverage, he has support and he may wind up winning in the next election. So we have to treat him very seriously. We need to look at, what's Trump all about? And I think Trump is a hazard, is definitely the wrong person for the job, but the overall reasons are, and I think they're so important to understand. And the first is that Trump has no plan. He does not plan. When I interviewed him the last year of his presidency for 9 hours, I kept saying, what's the plan? What's the plan on dealing with COVID? And he would say things like, oh, don't worry at all. I'll have a plan in 106 days. I said, no, wait a minute. 140,000 people are dying in the country already. It is a pandemic. I'll have a plan in 106 days. I was so stunned I couldn't figure out what it was. Of course, that turned out to be Election Day. That's all Trump was concerned about. He was not concerned about the people in the country.
You know, I was scribbling down notes. You said something about Donald Trump and getting to understand the man. And I bring that up because you begin the book by writing about a 1989 interview you and Carl Bernstein, your Watergate partner, did with Trump at Trump Tower. And I want to play a little snippet of it and talk to you about it on the other side. Let's listen.
The other week, I was watching a boxing match in Atlantic City, and the champion lost, and he was defeated by somebody who's a very good fighter, but he wasn't expected to win. And they interviewed the boxer after the match, and they said, "How'd you do this? How'd you win?" And he said, "I just went with the punches, man. I just went with the punches." I thought it was a great expression, because it's about life, just as much as it's about boxing or anything else. You go with the punches.
So, Bob, I wanted to play that because I just wonder what you find so instructive about that quote from Trump today. How this roll with the punches that he said 35 years ago, how that might help us understand who he is today, or maybe even how he got here today.
Very important question. First, it is 35 years ago, and at this time, Trump was a real estate king in New York City, had nothing to do with politics. In fact, I asked him in this interview, and he's kind of pushed off. But you see in this interview, Carl Bernstein and myself did it. Carl ran into him at some point and it said, let's do an interview. So we we interviewed him in Trump Tower, all real estate, but there were theme lines that Trump presented that reflect who he is. And one of them was clearly, how do you deal with people? And he said, well, you either be a killer or be candy. Other words, kill people or be sweet, or both. And you look at Trump's career in politics today as he's running for president again, and you see those traits, killer, candy.
You know, he also says in that interview, quote, "I like having great friends and great enemies." So which one motivates him more, the great friends or the great enemies?
Oh, such a great question. I don't know, but he's driven by both. And he wants to have friends. Again, it's candy. He is quite willing to kill people, not literally, but politically with his rhetoric. And we now see this. So again, we see this Trump out there, no plan. No, I mean, really, literally has no plan. He wings it every day. And if you follow him, he really has no allies. There's no team. Now, one of the things we learn in trying to understand and write about politics is the team is essential. You don't do anything alone. Trump does everything alone. People who work with him. I mean, now, it's down to you never know. When he was president, he had 5 defense secretaries. Joe Biden's had 1. Most presidents have 1 or 2. 5, because Trump cannot work or build a team. And I mean, Jonathan, you have producers who work with you, right?
Right.
You need them?
Yeah, hell yeah.
Okay, yes. And in fact, if you went in to the office and they were on strike or something, say, we're not doing this anymore, you would be traumatized, right? So,
Right. You wouldn't even know how to
uh,
turn on the camera.
exactly. And questions and who's the guest going to be and how do we work? Now, can I do something very different here?
Yeah.
My assistant, Claire McMullen, who's been with me for a number of books, is a lawyer from Australia and knows all this material better than I do, quite frankly. Can I introduce her?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Where is
I'm
it?
gonna
Claire, where
slide.
are you?
Here's Claire.
Hi, John, how are you?
Now,
Hello.
you can
You don't have a
enter
mic on you, but we can at least see you, and an opportunity for me and for the folks who are watching, really, Claire, to say thank you, because without you, Bob is nothing.
That is absolutely true. Yeah.
He still works 14-hour days. I don't know any other 81-year-old that could do what he does. He is the most dedicated, determined reporter, constantly driving for the truth and to answer questions that are, that you see in this book, in the public interest and what people want to know. And I mean, he's so humble. He would never talk about his work ethic, but I've never seen anything like it. And at 81 to still be doing this day in and day out. And he writes in the book about me saying, I'm going to keep going, but he's the one that just keeps going and going and going.
Yes,
What?
but if,
Yes, go ahead, Bob.
Claire was not here, okay, let's let you
Bye, Claire.
go back, taking notes, slipping cards to me, and so forth. But working at the Post for 52 years, Jonathan, this idea, you never do anything alone. Back in Watergate, it was with Carl Bernstein, the editors at the Post, Ben Bradley. Ben Bradley, in the movie All the President's Men, played by Jason Robart, it's like they were twins, exactly who Bradley was, this kind of aggressive style. Let's get to the bottom of the story we're working on, giving you running room. And on Watergate, a lot of the senior national reporters came to Ben and said, why are you letting these kids, Bernstein and Woodward, do this story? He loved it. He said, well, let's see how they do. And he did. He gave us that freedom, and he not only let Carl and myself partner, but we partnered with the editors.
So, thank you for introducing us to Claire and reminding everybody that the jobs that we do, it's not, we might be the face, but there are a lot of people behind us helping us get things off the ground. You mentioned earlier how Donald Trump has no friends, which I want to bring up a relationship that Trump has that you write about in the book, and that is the Trump-Putin relationship. And I bring that up because there's a question that we have from an audience member by the name of Rick Unger from Pennsylvania. And Rick wants to know, what do you think Trump admires about Putin?
Well, Trump says it. I admire Putin. He loves the autocracy. He loves the idea that Putin has all of this power. He's almost envious of it. And of course, this is part of the danger. We live in a democracy, and lots of other candidates and presidents will talk about the power of democracy. Trump talks about the power of autocratic authority, that you can just decide when you're in that position. He admires it. There are many times Trump says, I get along fine with Putin, which, yes, he's right. It's good to get along with it. But who is Vladimir Putin? Vladimir Putin is the Adolf Hitler of our century. The invasion of Ukraine is the equivalent to what Hitler did, trying to take over a country that's free and doing it. And I mean, hundreds of thousands of people have died in this war. This is a war for what purpose? It is for the purpose of Vladimir Putin saying, going back in his, I mean, you read what he writes, what he says, it's really insane that somehow Ukraine doesn't exist. Well, of course it exists. Oh, it really should be a part of Russia, so I'm going to take it. And he invades. And there's some scenes in the book before the invasion where the intelligence people in the United States and in the Biden White House, they're saying, wait a minute, this is crazy. He's not going to do this. And people are going back and forth, rightly so. Is this possible? Of course, he did it. He is now put, I mean, think of all the terror and war in the world. What's going on in the Ukraine invasion is so serious. One of the things I did in the reporting is talk to the Polish President Duda. And geographically, there's Poland and then Ukraine and Russia. And Duda's quite upfront about it. He said, look, if Russia takes Ukraine, now I'm going to have a 300-mile plus border with Russia and Ukraine controlled by Russia. He is, this is his nightmare. And he refers back to what happened in the 30s with Adolf Hitler. And Putin is really this, you dig into this, and I'm able to talk to intelligence authorities, people who have information about him, and the conclusion is not only is he authoritarian, he's sadistic, and he gets a joy out of this. And so take Vladimir Putin and the threat to the world seriously.
Well, let's talk more about Vladimir Putin and the threat to the world seriously, because in war, you write about the challenges facing the Biden administration before and after Russia's invasion. And among them was keeping Russia from actually using a tactical nuclear weapon against Ukraine. How close did Russia come to doing such a thing?
Well, it started out intelligence kind of, oh, well, maybe there's a 5 or 10%. It got down to 50%. And in the White House, they are sitting there looking at this, and they realize, the national security officials for President Biden, this is a coin flip, a coin flip. And one of the officials, key people in the Biden White House, is saying, my God, this is what it must have been like in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, living on the edge. This is really a serious, serious threat. And Biden and people, there are scenes in the book. This is a very long scene, and I'm not going to read it, though I'm tempted to read it. That, and again, this is the planning that Trump never does. In the national security team in the White House, they plan and they have this intelligence that the threat of a tactical nuclear weapon is coming.
Bob, read it. You don't have to read everything, but I'm sure folks who are watching would love to hear you read from the book on this.
Okay, so what happens is Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, somebody not well known. I tell you, we learned so much about him in this book. So Austin calls up his equivalent in Russia, the defense secretary Shoigu, and says, just write out, we know you are contemplating the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. And he laid out the consequences, and the consequences are actually quite brilliant about saying, look, this isn't just going to be the use of one tactical nuclear weapon. It's been 80 years since nuclear weapons have been used. And he's trying to say, don't do it. And it's a very, I would love to read it all, but if you see it in the book, so here's what happened. So he's laying this out in a very direct way. And Chogu, the defense minister of Russia, says to Austin, I don't take kindly to being threatened. Austin, one of the most powerful lines I've seen in 52 years of journalism. Austin says to his counterpart in Russia, Mr. Minister, I am the leader of the most powerful military in the history of the world. I don't make threats.
It's
This is the real life under the scenes, behind the scenes, and you see this kind of real struggle to keep from the world from spinning out of control. Because should Putin order the use of tactical nuclear weapons, the world changes. In the Biden administration, they obviously don't want to have it happen on their watch, but they realize if it does happen, they define an era. And for 80 years, no nuclear weapons have been used. And here's Putin, who is not only sadistic, but totally in charge, threatens this. And so they examine, quite rightly, the conditions. Now, wait a minute, why would he use tactical nuclear weapons? And they get into, there are many explicit scenes about the worry in Russia. They have a doctrine that they can use tactical nuclear weapons if they face or experience what they call catastrophic battlefield loss. Other words, and there are scenes in Ukraine where the Russians are really threatened with catastrophic battlefield loss, and under their doctrine, use tactical nuclear weapons. And this is what Biden's trying to talk them out of. And thank God that catastrophic situation eased. And there are scenes where American generals are talking to the Russian generals, kind of saying, okay, now you don't have to use tactical nuclear weapons. They want to prevent this, but also it's kind of this realization that comes with every presidency that I've tried to understand and write about, and that is that we're bringing not just our actions, but we will define an era. And if that era includes the use of tactical nuclear weapons, we're in a new world.
In relation to the threat that you read from, the quote you read from Defense Secretary Austin to his Russian counterpart, the other key thing is not just the words, it's the secretary's voice. Very deep, theatric. That's why I reacted the way I did, because I had his voice in my ear. If you don't take him seriously after that, I don't know how anyone would. Let's shift from Vladimir Putin to Benjamin Netanyahu. You report extensively about the escalating conflict in the Middle East and President Biden's frustration in their dealings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You quote President Biden saying, and I want to put it on the screen because there's some tart language in here, that son of a bitch, Bibi Netanyahu, he's a bad guy. He's a bad effing guy. Bob, what does that quote tell you about the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu?
Really important question. And it's that tense. And even it gets to another point where, and this is President Biden speaking to his close aides in the White House, uh, saying that Netanyahu is a effing liar. And he even goes further and says 18 of the 19 people who work for Netanyahu are liars. Total distrust. But here's the geostrategic reality. We are allies of Israel, and Biden sticks to that, but Biden's policy really is
Looks like we
pro-Israel.
lost Bob's audio somehow. Bob,
Oh, I'm sorry. Did it come off or oops? Who
did we lose
knows?
the audio, or I just can't hear him? Say
Sorry.
something, Bob.
Pardon?
There you go. I think I can hear you now. Go ahead, Bob. Sorry about that.
Okay. So this worry couldn't be greater, and Netanyahu open internally, not publicly, with his distrust and his frustration with Netanyahu, and to say he to his closest aides, this man is a liar. And so there's that distrust. But at the same time, Israel and the United States are allies. They need each other. But to have this broken personal distrust really drives part of it. And as we're going through what's going on in the Middle East now, uh, it it's not, you don't necessarily hope or think it should be chummy, but it should be a relationship of deeper trust rather than this kind of mistrust.
Bob, one more question on this before I start asking you about the 2024 election. Does for a lot of people, the actions of the Israeli military seems to represent a loss of influence of the United States over Israel. And I'm just wondering, has the United States lost influence, or is it that the relationship between the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel is in bad shape, and that is what's driving this?
Well, no, I think it is a manifestation of it. Look, we've got to do something to help Israel. That's United States policy. That's Biden's policy. I think it would even be in its, if somebody else were president, Vice President Harris, or even Donald Trump, that would be part of the calculus. It's the closer you get to the detail of this as a reporter, you see that the drama behind the scenes is not emotional. It's strategic. That we are hanging in this period of such grave uncertainty. So at the end of the book, I try to draw some conclusions, namely involving the Ukraine war, the Middle East. This is going to be right there on the new president's desk, whoever it is. The tensions and the hostility and the risk and the violence is not going away.
I'm going to bring in another audience question, sort of tangentially related. This is from Sarah Pinto in Florida. She asks, what is one piece of advice for Kamala, Vice President Kamala Harris, to help salvage the world's view of U.S. foreign policy?
Well, that as reporters, we don't, or at least not an opinion reporter, try not to give advice. She's got a really, really hard job. And you need to think about the vice presidency. It is, she is fortunate, and I would argue from the detail I have, that she's gone to president's school. She's gained a lot of experience, seen the sidelines. There are cases, even there's one case where the United States defeats a massive attack from Iran, not just the United States, but Israel and other allies. And they're having an NSC, National Security Council meeting at this very tense moment. And Harris is up on the screen. She's not there in the White House, but it's a secure screen. And this is a really difficult moment. And, but it's been, the missiles from Iran have been defeated summarily. And Biden asks Harris, the vice president, said, what should we do? What do you think? And she gets off one of these important lines strategically and almost emotionally. She said, take the win. And so Biden goes back to talking and recommends to President Netanyahu, take the win. It's right out of her mouth.
We've already run out of time, but I'm not letting you go without asking you two more questions.
Thank you.
On the front page, are you under a time crunch?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm in your hands. I'm very honored that you would bring one of the old guys in.
All right, here are the two questions. The first one's a long one. The New York Times has a fascinating story on its front page today. The headline reads, "Some believe in Trump without believing him." All about how they don't believe he'd follow through on any of the threats he's leveled on the campaign trail. One guy interviewed said that Trump was, quote, just riling up the news. I'd love your thoughts on this.
No, I mean, yes, Trump likes to rile up the news and so forth, but he again, this is the theme here. No team. He does not have a team. Look, there are half the people in the country who support him, and they ought to think about this important characteristic. You need a team. We all need teams. We do not, Claire here, your producers, it's absolutely essential, and it's not something to kind of pretend, hey, gee, we're doing this alone.
Last question for you. You've written or co-written 23 books. Are you already at work on the 24th?
Well, I write those books from reporting on what's going on. And of course, what's going on is so important now. I mean, it is risky. It is risky to a degree, and particularly in this area of having an autocrat like Putin leading Russia, threatening to use tactical nuclear weapons if he is confronting significant catastrophic battlefield loss. And there have been moments in the Russia-Ukraine war where that peaked and it's subsided, but it can go again. And Putin has made it very clear he does not want to lose this war. You know what? This war is insane. The idea, if this were a democracy, if in a democracy the people would just say, who's this leader? We've got to fix it, because it makes no sense.
Bob, so is the big hint here the 24th book is going to be about Vladimir Putin?
Oh, you mean the next one? I don't know. I'm not able to talk to him. I reveal in the book that he sent the point of care COVID test kits to President Trump when he was president, and they talked about this, and it's such a window into this Trump-Putin alliance, and couldn't make it clearer because Trump is done this thing covertly. This is equipment that Americans need, and he tells to Putin, he's done this, and Putin is quite delighted, and he says to Trump, "Don't tell anyone." And Trump says, you know, I'm not, I mean, Putin's worried about Trump. This alliance goes to the point where Vladimir Putin is worried about the President Trump's public relations image, and he's trying to fix it and trying to help it. And of course, this comes out in the book, and Trump, as happens, he immediately denies it. I was astonished. The Kremlin issued a statement saying, "No, this is true." I don't know. I'm now in the future going to remember to call the Kremlin if I've written something about Russia. Maybe they will have some response.
And you know, maybe now is the time to ask for that interview with Putin. Now that you know that they're reading what you're writing. Bob Woodward, Washington Post associate editor and author of War. Thank you so much for coming back to Washington Post Live.
Thank you.
I'm going to run downstairs and see you. And thank you for joining us. For more of these important conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription. Get a free trial by visiting that address you see at the bottom of the screen, washingtonpost.com/live. Once again, I'm Jonathan Capehart, associate editor at the Washington Post. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live.